So I've got some pretty big project lined up for the next few days, and I have been relatively busy today. As such, we're going to address a slightly milder, simpler topic today, and then you can be prepared for the big stuff coming in the next days. So today we're talking about something that I have been asked quite a while ago to address as a topic, which is Smite still a skillshot MOBA? And back then, the situation was in some ways a little different than it is now, and that's why I felt like it was a good time to address this now. So this was asked about the time that Sol and Chiron were the newest gods. And if you look at those gods, yes, they have a certain level of skill to them, especially Sol basically has multiple abilities, you need to aim and stuff like that, but they were relatively simple. You have a huge AoE that is ranged, you have Chiron's 2 that marks the target, you have an ultimate that's not that hard to confirm and one that's not that hard to confirm and stuff like that. So at that point it felt like gods in Smite would be slowly becoming easier. Now Smite had always had some easier gods and some harder gods obviously. There is for example Neith that simply has an ultimate which cannot really be considered a skill shot by a normal definition of it. You have an auto aim on that ability, you don't actually need to hit it, and that's the same with Chiron's too. So as such, there is not as much skill required as there would be, for example, for a normal line ability. In recent times, however, we have seen a transition. Now, if you look at Erlang Shen was probably a good example of a very simple god. Erlang Shen has a large taunt, he has a large circle damaging ability. Even if you don't hit the root that way, or the cripple, you will still have a very large AoE radius in which you will deal damage. And other than that, he has something that makes his basic attacks easier, so a steroid that's also Hasten Fatalis built in. Once again, a benefit that you don't necessarily need and that really makes it easier to swing down on your enemy. And his 3 is also not particularly complex in how it is used. So if you look at that god, you could say, maybe the skill requirements overall are declining. But past that, things have taken a different direction. There was Terra, and Terra was arguably still one of the gods where landing abilities is not the hardest part. Her 2 needs a bit of practice, but they changed it so it's easier to land. Her 3 has a large radius, her ult doesn't need to be aimed, and her 1 is also not that hard to aim, but you're going to use it as an escape or engage tool most of the time anyways and not to damage an enemy directly. However, with her kit it was already the case that map awareness and stuff like that, especially for the ultimate, is really important. That's the same for Neith, by the way. So we're taking a step in the direction where you have to pay attention to the whole map, which in my opinion is much harder in Smite than it would be, for example, in League of Legends and such, as you don't really have the same kind of awareness of the whole map as you're focused on your own character and your own lane and you can't just look at what's happening in other lanes. Past that, we had Izanami. Now Izanami is probably not even a debatable case. Izanami's basics, if you want to hit them to full effect, are harder to hit than any other hunters in the game because you basically need to confirm them twice. You have an escape that has a bit of delay that you need to get used to. You have an ultimate with a decent wind-up and a radius that's not small but also not that huge, which really needs some practice to be aimed. And as such, the whole kit kinda isn't that easy. Even her line ability is not the fastest, so you kinda need to get used to all of it and you kinda need to learn to aim all of that stuff very properly in order to get the fullest effect of her. So she is definitely a god that has a higher skill cap and a higher skill cap when it comes to her aim as well, and many people still aren't able to play her to full effect. After that, we had Camazotz. Camazotz is arguably a relatively strong god at the moment, simply because he has a lot of lifesteal and a lot of damage. He also does not have that much lockdown, so if you're looking at a balance perspective here, all of it is relatively debatable, but if you look at his abilities in themselves, there's a lot that can be said about them. 2 of his main damaging abilities, and the character falls with not being able to use his abilities properly, are line abilities. This is his 1 and his 2. If you don't use those line abilities properly and you are not able to aim them on a regular basis, then you fall behind completely and the character doesn't even reach half his potential. If you don't land his 2, you might as well back out. It's similar to a Thanatos Scythe. So, as such, this character has a relatively high skill cap. And that is, especially for an assassin, not even that common. If you look at past assassins, many of them have abilities that are easier to land, and only a very few of them have more than one line ability. Think, for example, Najjar. Najjar is one of those that is generally considered harder as well, simply because he relies so much on these line abilities, and even he can bounce his ring toss off other targets if any are around. So in that regard, Camazotz is already a harder guard. On top of that, he doesn't have the same mobility as some others, as his leap is very short and the rest of his mobility lies in his ultimate, so that also factors in, and his ultimate, while not being ultra hard to land, is also not that easy to land if you want to confirm multiple hits and the enemy is juking properly. Now, the newest guard is Thoth, and with Thoth we have a similar case. This guy really depends on hitting his 1, which is a line ability. Again, not that hard to hit, but still is definitely a skill shot. And especially his ultimate, which is very hard to hit in comparison to many other abilities, because it has that wind up and you need to probably put down your 3 as well to aim it properly and stuff like that. And then you have the 2, which is also a line ability, which also takes decent amount of aim. So we have, throughout the last guards, a variety of line abilities. We also have circle abilities with wind up that are relatively hard to confirm, stuff like that. We have plenty of harder to play guards at the moment, which I think is really cool, which I really enjoy. I like having guards that you need to practice first before you can really get full effectiveness out of their kits. And with that, I can come to closure that Smite is definitely still a skill shot game. And at the moment, Hi-Rez seems to be taking the direction of making those skill shots more important for the guard again. Maybe this will change again down the road, or maybe this is just a brief period. We will see. The next guard, for example, doesn't seem like she's all too much depending on that. But after that, we don't really know. We don't know what's happening next. So, in the end, I think the direction we're seeing at the moment is really good. Smite is staying a skill shot game, and we don't have to worry about it being too watered down and becoming too easy. And that's my opinion on this. Thank you guys for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one. Duke SLOTH, out.